The poorest white women would save their pennies to get a washerwoman because it dented their stature in the community to have those clotheslines and pots in their own yard because it was thought of as black women's work.
Professor Blair L.M. Kelly is the author of a new book, Black Folk: The Roots of the Black Working Class. She is the Williamson Distinguished Professor of Southern Studies, Director of the Center for Study of the American South, and co-director of the Southern Futures Initiative at the University of North Carolina. Professor Kelly, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Really happy to have you on. And you now live in North Carolina, but after reading your book, I know that you grew up in the North, but clearly, you know, every title that you've got is like Southern this, American South that. You have a really deep interest in the Southern United States. Why is that?
That's where my family's from. It's where my roots are. And I've been in North Carolina since the 90s. So I know I'm not born here, but my mother was, and I have family here. And so I feel connected to it. And for me, the South is the region that tells us about the nation. It forecasts so much of what we have to deal with with the nation as a whole. And so it's not a region to abandon or to ignore. So.
Absolutely. Could not agree with you more there. And I really appreciate when I see academics and people who do research and study and try to tell the story of, you know, Southern folks and the working class here in the South, because in a lot of ways it really is overlooked. And so, you know, folks familiar with literature, particularly, you know, literature by and about black folks, are going to immediately notice a similarity in title to W.E.B. Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folk. And having read both, you know, I can see some similarities, but you actually take pains at the beginning of your book to point out some of the differences in your work and his. What would you say are some of the things that connect your work to that earlier piece, and what are the things that make it distinct?
You know, Du Bois is our greatest scholar, activist in African American history. So I by no means am thinking that I have anything to do to compare myself to his amazing body of work that really is still setting the standard for so many of us. That said, when I thought of the title Black Folk, I didn't mean like Souls of Black Folk. I meant like Black folk, like like how we address each other. Like, you know, Black folk always going to do such and such, or man, I love Black folk. You know, that feeling of it. So for me, it never was. I forgot about Du Bois, really, honestly, until my editor was like, "Are you going to address the elephant in the room?" And I was like, "What's that?" And he's like, "You in the introduction, we're going to have to talk about, you know, that you titled your book after Du Bois." I was like, "I did." So, and it was funny. I went to Twitter and I said to my Twitter followers, I said, "When I say Black folk, what do you think of?" And all the Black followers said, my grandmother, church, having to wear pantyhose on Sunday, food, da, 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 da. And all the white people were like, oh, Du Bois, his amazing work.
Wow. I did not realize that. I thought that there was like a conscious thing there, but that is fascinating.
It was like goofy and unconscious.
Well, no, I really like it. Folk is a word. I say that word a lot. I like it. I think it's a very good word. And so I appreciate the title, even outside of the reference. That is, so I learned something.
It's a great word. It's ungendered. We have very few ungendered words. Right. I hate when people put the X on folk because I'm like, it's already ungendered. Like it's already doing all that work. So you don't have to do anything extra.
Yeah. Southern folks already gave you a super great word. You ain't got to make it, you know, so yeah. I totally
it already transcends.
There you go. So, you know, the project of the book is, and you know, tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me to be an attempt to demystify the Black working class and to correct some assumptions about it in two key ways. And one is attacking the notion that Black folk, today in some sense, but more than that in the past, and particularly under slavery and Jim Crow, that black folk did unskilled work. And you go, to great lengths in the book to show that actually, no, there's quite a lot of skill in the things that black folk did. And then in the second case, that there was a compliance and apathy that they had under the systems of slavery and Jim Crow, and that it was, the great, Yankee saviors kind of came and gave them all this, and they didn't do anything to fight back against their oppression and the evil that was done to them under slavery and Jim Crow and since. Talk to us about those the project of your book.
So for me, those two things are essential and central to what I'm arguing. I am always insulted when people say unskilled labor or menial labor, because I would like to see those folks who are designating and defining labor go do that work, and see how well they would do. Every job takes a skill set and a body of knowledge and a set of practices. And people become very skilled at them over time in doing that work. And so when I looked at my laundresses or my sharecroppers or postal workers or maids, they had a set of skills and they had to know how to do it quickly, efficiently, well, in some cases quite perfectly in order to survive. And so I was looking at the reels of farm workers during the pandemic that the United Farm Workers would put out.
I was just about to mention that.
People bundling radishes or cutting asparagus or leaning off trucks and, holding their bodies in the air as they cut and wrap and package things the way we see them in the supermarket in one fell swoop. And I who's saying unskilled and why are we saying that? And that seemed to be a vestige of another time where we had this sort of hierarchical, race-based set of notions that I think don't serve us well anymore. And so I blew them up in this book, and hopefully people won't say that anymore.
Right. There you go. Yeah. The phrase is done now, I think. I don't think we're going to be seeing it anymore after this book, and I'm really happy about that. But that is fascinating that you thought of the United Farm Workers, because I was thinking about those exactly, that Twitter account exactly, because there is really, I don't think in the modern day, another piece of media that I have seen that more aptly attacks that notion of unskilled labor, because I would recommend people, if you don't follow the United Farm Workers, the union United Farm Workers on Twitter, follow it and go through their media tab, because they're constantly putting out videos that just will make your jaw drop if you're being honest about how skillfully they do the work. And then they'll also juxtapose that with oftentimes how little they're being paid for this work. Yes. And your jaw will drop again, necessarily. And so the two of the standout professions that you mention in the book, trying to kind of attack the notion that they're unskilled, you referenced washerwomen and letter carriers. And both of those are really kind of thought of as unskilled, but especially washerwomen, women who wash clothes, right? You say that and people are typically, they're not going to think of, oh, that is, that's skilled labor. But it really was. Talk to us about what they had to do to succeed in their work.
So, the Black women who emerged from slavery, they had that skill of washing clothes, and it required a lot of knowledge, wisdom about how to create tools, how to make soap, a lot of things that we call, artisanal soap, and they were doing that right. Prior to the advent of any technology that we take advantage of to wash our clothes or to mix anything or make anything. They were recycling materials in order to bring to their yards, to burn for fire, to use for pots, using different things to squeeze water out of things, then pressing with an iron. The reason we call it an iron is it used to be a piece of iron where you had to wrap a rag around the handle in order not to burn yourself and heat it up in some coal and then not burn the clothing. You had to find that right temperature for the iron. I mean, again, if we had to wash our clothes that way, most of us would just be like laying somewhere and crying because we wouldn't have the skill set. And it was a skill set that was passed down over generations. And Black women really held a monopoly on that work because in enslavement, they were the people who did that work. And they understood their power, as a question you asked me earlier that I didn't fully answer, referenced that in enslavement, they understood that they had something valuable that people would want. And they could set the terms for their labor going forward in freedom. And they did. And so it's really amazing to see their consciousness that didn't have to be raised by some outside source. They didn't have to be educated about their role in society. They understood from the work itself and observing society who they were and what they could do and what they could fight for.
And not only do people think of, washerwomen is maybe unskilled, but when you think of, like, kind of like you were alluding to, when you think of washerwomen, you don't think immediately of kind of a militant and organized working class. But actually, you talk about how washerwomen, in their creation as such, were some of the biggest forms of resistance that the Black working class did coming out of slavery.
Absolutely. I think the power of, their choice at the very beginning, the white customers wanted them to wash clothes at their own homes, at their homes, so the clothes wouldn't go away and they could have control over their bodies, control over their time, and the control over the pace of their labor. And washerwomen collectively, individually, collectively, across the South, all tap into this idea that, like, nah, we're going to do this at home. We're going to do it at our own homes. We're going to watch our own kids. We're going to take care of our own household tasks, and we'll do it at our pace. We'll come get it on a Saturday. We'll bring it back to you on Friday. Congratulations. This is what you're going to get. And I think it's so powerful that the decisions about how this work would be done was made by Black women. In the very first moments of freedom, and Jackson, Mississippi, there's a group of women who organized a union in 1866. I mean, if that doesn't teach you everything you need to know about how workers can think for themselves, I don't know what would.
Absolutely. I found that so cool that, that was the first thing that so many Black women did across the South. That's really, just amazing. And their resistance didn't stop there. And you mentioned they formed unions, they went on strikes, and there were a couple of reasons why they had, so much power. And one of them was that there was real skill that was required at that time to be a washerwoman. And, I guess if you when I stopped and thought about it for a little bit, it made sense because, like you said, like, there's soap, you have to get the proportions right for these chemicals so that you're going to clean the shirt, but not deteriorate it or stain it or put a hole in it. You've got to have an iron, like a literal iron that you heat with a fire, and you have to get it to a perfect temperature so that, again, it doesn't burn a hole in the garments. So there's real skill there. But additionally, there was a social stigma around being a washerwoman, and there was an anecdote that you told about a former slaveholding man that really illustrated that stigma. Can you tell us that?
Yeah, that story is crazy. When I found it, I was like, okay, sir. So there was a man who had a plantation, had a full complement of hundreds of people who all walked away at the end of during the Civil War, and he was struggling to take care of his family. He was older, and he had two daughters. And he was like, well, no, I gotta try to wash these clothes myself because I can't degrade my two daughters by having them be seen outside washing their own clothes and washing our household clothes. It will destroy the family. So it's better for me to go out there and try and figure out how to do it. And that's when I was like, wow, there really is, the racialization of labor was really, that was deep. That was really deep, that to see white women doing their own laundry. And, there's a beautiful book by a historian named Tara Hunter called To Join My Freedom, which I've loved for a long time. And I keep recommending it. I will say her name rhythmically. She points out that, the poorest white women would save their pennies to get a washerwoman because it just, it dented their stature in the community to have those clotheslines and pots in their own yard because it was thought of as Black women's work.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Right. And that was such a bizarre kind of idea that it was so racialized as that even the poorest would try to farm this work out. And over the course, as the years went on, like you mentioned and like in your book, they went on strikes, they withheld their labor, and so there were some attempts to try to get poor white women to take up this work. And you mentioned one op-ed that the guy had to basically apologize for suggesting that white women should also do this work.
Yeah, I mean, he was like, well, we could call it something different and they could maybe work in a factory and maybe they could do, he was really trying to like build up this infrastructure that would make it slightly okay. And nothing like that ever happened anywhere in the country. 65% of all laundry washed at one point is washed by Black women in this country. And Black women were, less than 20% of the population of working women.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I listened to an interview that you recently did on KQED, and you mentioned there that for the proportion of Black women washing clothes to be 65%, in some areas, it almost certainly had to be 100%. It was 100%. Right. Absolutely. Because you've got areas of the country where there are basically no Black people,
Yes. And the people who were probably washing the other laundry were probably Chinese Americans.
Right.
And not white Americans either.
Right. Yeah. So the washerwomen are really a great example of both of the things that you try to do in your book, are both of those kind of central items, the showing that there's skill, and then also there's a resistance there. The other one that I wanted to talk about was the letter carriers. And, so I'm a unionist, I'm a union member, I'm an officer on my labor council, and I have a union radio show. So I know about the postal strike of the 1970s. But I did not know about the organizing and the all-Black union of postal workers that came before it, and that you argue was really central to the postal strike in the 70s actually happening. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. So for Black folks, postal work is work in protest, is work in resistance. It's the only working class set of labor delineated in the Constitution. And so it was esteemed. It's part of our citizenship. It's part of our outlook as a nation. And yet the nation passed laws banning Black men and women from participating in it. Only after the Civil War do you have any numbers of Black men who will begin to work in the Postal Service, and then Black women. And it is a fight the entire time. There are communities in the South that don't hire their first Black letter carriers until the 1950s and 60s. And that federal employment was so important. And so the change happened because Black workers who did gain access immediately began to join unions and organize and fight. And their outlook was essential to making space for Black people to join, fight for their space in the Postal Service. And what's interesting to me about Black unionists is consistently throughout history, they're not just concerned about their own rights in their own sort of realm of organizing. They're civil rights activists, and they are always thinking more broadly and about more coalition. And so it makes sense that the leadership of Black postal workers and the tradition of the leadership of Black postal workers in a unionized space leads to that strike in the 1970s that's so impactful on the entire nation. And there's a wonderful postal historian, Philip Rubio, who I want to shout out here, who's also a union postal worker and turned historian, whose work I am really thankful for in illuminating this larger history.
And the Pullman porters are similar to the postal workers in that they are that is a career that's open to Black working folks fairly early on, that pays better, that allows them to be a little bit more educated and allows them to be well traveled. And I found your section of the book about the Pullman porters to be a really I thought a helpful correction in some of my own imagination about the Pullman company, because when I hear Pullman, I think of Eugene Debs, right?
Yes, exactly, and the strikes and stuff. Yeah, yes, absolutely.
But
good to know that he was awful to white workers too.
Right. Yeah. It was the guy was just terrible.
Yes.
But in many ways, the Black Pullman unions, the Pullman porters, were really more consequential to the history of the company and the trajectory of the company than even the white conductors, wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. The Pullman porters, George Mortimer Pullman, wanted this all Black male force because he thought it would remind people of the antebellum South and being swept away in luxury and having a Black manservant waiting on you. He incidentally made this all Black male more educated, more well-traveled, more versed in the world, Black male working force, and Black women as well. There were some Pullman maids, and they organized. They had to fight really hard. The Pullman Company did so much to suppress the union in every way it could, with spies and trickery and blank checks given to leaders and all kinds of things, and firing folks. But they persevered over decades of trying. It's really a 10-year period where A. Philip Randolph takes the helm. He's not a Pullman porter himself. His brother had been one at one point, and they need someone from the outside to help to give them some strength so that not everyone can be fired. And they eventually, after a 10-year period, organized, but then they build the civil rights movement. Then they, create the infrastructure that leads to the March on Washington that we know about in the 1960s. They push FDR to dissemble the segregation in federal employment. They do so many different kinds of things that go beyond just their own needs for wages and decent hours.
And just to go back quickly to the postal carriers, to illustrate the other point about the, attacking the notion of unskilled labor, the president of the United States tried to break that strike with the National Guard and was not able to.
Absolutely. That unity that we're talking about, it created an argument that society as a whole understood, that folks didn't want to support this, and the folks that they tried to bring in as scabs from the military couldn't do the work. They couldn't efficiently deliver the mail because it's skilled labor.
Right.
And so it was an amazing moment in our history as a country for bringing together so many of the things that we need to remember now. And we need to focus on now in terms of the strength of labor and the importance of it, and honoring it and treating people with respect.
Absolutely. So the book is really great. We're talking to Professor Blair L.M. Kelly. I really enjoyed it. The title is Black Folk, The Roots of the Black Working Class. And, you know that we're a union talk radio program, and we are on the radio in Alabama. And so why do you think this book is, what in particular do you think this book has to say to Southerners and Alabamians and Unionists here in the South?
I think what's really powerful for me is twofold. I use my personal family stories, the stories that were passed down to me about their lives as Southerners, as migrants, as people who were looking for a fair treatment. And I draw on their wisdom and their knowledge of the world and their everyday stories. No one in my family was a famous organizer. No one in my family was a famous civil rights veteran. They were all everyday working people. And yet to look at the lives of everyday working people from the South is to look at wisdom and to look at a collective knowledge and to look at strength. And when we want to figure out good models for how we can go forward as a country, how we can think about what's possible in the future, they provided those good models. And the everyday people in my family, the everyday people in other people's families are whose voices I wanted to glean strength from to write this book. And so we have a lot to learn from everyday working people. And I hope the country is finally starting to wake up to that.
And, that's a really great place to kind of wrap it up on, because this is really an interesting time for working folks in the United States, because there appears to be a resurgence in militancy among workers. There's a resurgence in interest in labor organizing. A new poll that the AFL-CIO commissioned last week just came out that said 88% of people under the age of 30 have a positive view of unions. That is astronomical.
That's great.
I mean, you can't get 9 out of 10 people to agree on just about anything.
No.
And so, we have these high profile labor struggles, the UPS Teamsters, the UAW, the Starbucks stuff that's going on, the actors and the writers on strike, who, if you think of working people that may be more and less sympathetic, the actors and writers are going to be at the least sympathetic end, just because of how people conceptualize of Hollywood. Not because they're less deserving, of course, because, but people they think Hollywood and they think
it's fancy.
Exactly. And so, but even in that context, that poll said that something like 70% of Americans were on the side of the actors and the writers. And this is all, but it is amid a context of 50 years of neoliberal economics, and that in many ways has returned us to the Gilded Age. And so, what do you make of the current moment for the working class generally, and the Black working class specifically, and how the history that you've traced to this point is important in understanding the current moment, as well as, our potential futures?
I think the pandemic called the question. I think we were kind of sleepy and doing a lot of work, and nobody was really thinking about how any of us were orienting our lives or sacrificing too much. And then the pandemic hit, and we created something that we called essential workers for the first time. We're like, who's that? And those folks had to keep working, and they had to keep plugging away, and they died at higher rates than everyone else. And they happen to have been more Black, more brown, more Native than everyone in the country, and more working class than everyone else in the country, because they didn't have the luxury of staying home and, staying safe. And so as we came out of that crisis moment, I think a lot of people reflected. We had the Great Resignation. We had all these moments where people were like, "Oh no, we can't get people to work." And then it was interesting to me that people weren't saying, "Oh, well, so we need to pay more, and so we need to give better benefits. We need to give them insurance, fun things like that. And so the market shifted, right? But it shifted in a way that enabled workers to really say, hey, we deserve a bigger piece of what we produce as labor. And people finally understood. I think that those high numbers in those polls are indicative of this moment. And something that if you probably asked 10 years ago, people wouldn't have agreed. But now people understand, when folks started dying at their jobs, that serving others and providing important resources in our hospitals, in our schools, in our, all these different kinds of spaces, we all of a sudden we're like, oh, okay, yeah, this is needed, this is essential, this is skilled, this is valuable, and how do we do better than we've been doing? And so unions can really step into that space and break out of the bad rap that conservatives have given unions for generations. I'm a union baby myself, and I, my mother always taught me the value of each and every little thing that she had because she was a union member. And so I think that we can begin to teach those little things that, will make life more fair and more decent that can come from union work. And for me, Black folk is a reminder that the union work has to be collective. It has to be broad in its scope. It cannot be just about just us. We need to just improve us. It really has to say workers, people who work, people who labor deserve more, that we all need to advocate for one another really broadly. And so that's something I've been encouraged to see in the organizing and the lesson that Black workers and Black folk can give us about the power of thinking broadly about what we deserve.
Professor Blair L. M. Kelly, the book is Black Folk, The Roots of the Black Working Class. Really enjoyed the conversation. Recommend folks get the book. Appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.